This video is about a Windows 98 2nd edition install media, both CD and USB that I've created. Well, why did I create it? We already have the CD, the original one. Well, maybe you want to play some retro games, DOS games, with Sound Blaster sound. But the computer you have is perhaps like a dual-core AMD Athlon X6 64-bit X2 with 4 GB of RAM. Can we use this? Well, yes, actually. If you use PCI Sound card, you can actually get Sound Blaster support in DOS games. How authentic is it? Well, it's not an ISO card, but it does work quite well. And it is a pretty interesting experience running old Windows 98 on a way too fast computer. Also, it might be the only hardware you have to work with. In addition, I made some additions to the install media that add some convenience. And I will tell you more about it in a second. The setup process will expect the PC to have a hard drive with a primary partition that is active. If you don't have it, you can make one. You just go to partition with fdisk. Yes. And then we press 5 to change the current fixed disk, because the current one would be the USB drive, which is C, because we booted from the USB drive. If you boot from the CD, then the hard drive will be C. And then we can change the drive, and as you see here, the first one is the USB stick, and you see 400 megabytes. That's the partition from the image you downloaded. And then the hard drive itself in the computer is the second disk, and it has 2 partitions. So if we then select disk 2, and then we can press 4 to display information, and then you can see D is the one we are going to install to. It has status A, it's active, and it's a primary DOS partition. So yeah, and then there's a second one, which is just, if you want some files that remain, that are not formatted. The setup process will only format D, not E or anything else. So make sure you have that correct. Also, because fdisk is started with a special option, we are allowed to set these partitions active. Specifically, you want this one to be active. But if you just start fdisk without any special flags when you start it, then it won't allow you to set this active, only C. So that's why I also have this option in the menu. So create the primary partition, set it active, and then during the installation process, it will format that drive, and you're good to go. You can of course do this on a normal Windows installation on another computer with some partition manager or something. It doesn't matter. It just needs to have a primary partition that is active before you start installing. So here we are. We are currently now booted from the USB stick, and we arrive at this menu. This contains memory patches of different kinds. This is to handle the excessive amount of RAM on this computer. Windows 98 doesn't really like 4 GB of RAM. So there are some different configurations, this is the simplest one, which is just like a configuration change in a Windows file. And then we have Patchmem, which is widely regarded as very good, which updates some system files. Then we have an alternative with himemx and umbpci. And then we have Patchmem again, but with a different memory configuration of 2 GB. So the amounts here, 512 and 2048, is how much we limit Windows 98 to see. So it will only see 512 megabytes, even if it has like 4 gigabytes. And I've also kept an option of a standard Windows 98 without any such patches. And then for convenience, there is also the partition with fdisk option. But this is also quite important because since we are booted from a USB stick, essentially this drive, this USB stick is C. So fdisk doesn't like setting active partitions on other like drives that are not the primary drive. But this will start fdisk with an option where you are allowed to do stuff like that. So if I then select this option, I will get into a submenu, and I will have the option of choosing the like normal install or a no plug and play drive, plug and play installation. Certain modern computers might have issues, and no PNP might solve them. So and here is a series of screens, which this first one tells you about how it's configured, the installation. And then it tells you about partitioning and some stuff there. And then, yeah, some more information. Let's continue. Yes, we want to format. This will format the D drive. Notice that, because the primary hard drive on this computer will be D. Or well, the primary partition on the primary drive. This is necessary because our USB stick is C, because we're booted from it. This is different on the DVD or CD, but it looks basically the same in the setup. So let's do that. And it continues automatically because I've set it to have a default label. This is because sometimes the format will take a long time, and having it pause and wait for you to enter a label is annoying, since also the copying of files takes a while. So what it has done now is format the C drive, made it bootable. Well, it's copied the system files like a basic DOS, and it's already active. And now it's created a Win98 folder, and it's copying all the setup files. And when this is finished, we can reboot the computer from the hard drive in the PC, and it will automatically start the setup. At this point, I can add some more information. The Win98 folder is configured in the msbatch.inf file, so that Windows 98 will check for drivers there. The important thing is the drivers need to be in the Win98 folder directly. It could also be on the USB, so you could add the driver files on the Win98 folder there, or you could add them after this has copied to the Win98 folder in the C drive before or after the setup runs. If you add drivers before Windows setup runs, it will actually look for the drivers and use them during the installation, which is quite cool. And now the copying of the files has completed, and when we reboot, the computer will automatically boot the setup. This is in the auto exec, and there's a check. So if the C/Windows folder exists, it will not start the setup. So it should only start setup the first time. And the auto exec folder is also replaced. So there shouldn't be any issues. Another thing that is copied is and will be on the desktop is the a small batch file. Basically, as I mentioned, you can have like a Sound Blaster live card and use it with DOS games. And I've used the Phil's Computer Lab drivers. There is, however, a small issue that I've encountered where Windows doesn't boot when all the drivers are installed. My batch file fixes this issue by removing some things from the boot of sequence, so it doesn't load. You can check it out later. And now the computer has rebooted. We're now booted from the hard drive inside the computer. And you can see it checks if Windows exists or not. And if it doesn't exist, it starts the setup with the ms batch file for the selection you made. And at this point, it's basically a normal setup of Windows 98 2nd edition. The only thing is that there are some scripts that run at the end of the setup, basically copying some files to the desktop. One of the files is the Sound Blaster script that I mentioned. Another file is the USB driver, so that you can have USB sticks in Windows 98, which makes copying files easier. And I've added this so that... Sorry? And I've added this so that the initial setup of things will be easier. But it's a stock Windows 98 2nd edition, except for the memory patches. And a little tweak that makes it look for drivers in the Win98 folder. But small stuff. And there it ran the custom script at the end there with the DOS command prompt. And we're done. And there we have it. The freshly installed Windows 98 2nd edition. And here we have it. The default desktop with mainly two files added. The first one is the script that makes the Sound Blaster driver for live cards and such, PCI, work, and then the USB driver. And the script for the fixing the driver issues after installing the Sound Blaster live driver from Phil's Computer Lab. Well, this might not be necessary for everyone, but I had to do it on this computer. So it removes some stuff from AutoExec and config.sys. And this makes the audio work in Windows, and I think also in DOS, as far as I remember. If these changes are not done, then Windows doesn't boot. So, yeah. And here are the system properties. And as you can see, it reports it as an Athlon 64 X2 dual core, but only 512 megabytes of RAM, even though we know it's got 4 gigabytes, as we could see when the machine booted. And a lot of drivers that needs installing. But it does boot, which helps a lot. And the Win98 folder I talked about, it's the same on this USB drive as here on C. So if you add drivers in here, just paste the driver files directly in, no subfolders, not zipped, then Windows 98 should auto-detect them and use them. Also, during installation from the USB stick or CD to this C drive, and when it's copying these files, it's copying all the files from the Win98 folder on the CD or USB over there. So if you add drivers or maybe some application, Windows 98 Service Pack 3, it will also copy those files over, but no subfolders, just files directly in the Win98 folder. You can ignore many of these things. These are just scripts for the installation process. And there are duplicates because of the different memory options. Of course, you can open them and get an idea of what happens. This is for the pure Windows installation. And then you have something like this, which is the one we installed. And then you can see here some editing is done for handling or limiting the amount of RAM. Also, the whole driver thing I've talked about is just a memory, a registry thing, which it adds, and then specifically adds this folder. So yeah, you can change this or add more and stuff. Also, I didn't show it during the setup, but the CD key is automatically added. So you don't have to write it in during setup, because that sucks. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So it simplifies things, as you can use USB stick. This has also, the image has been changed in the latest version to 400 megabytes. I think it was 200 before, so a bit more space to add files, but small enough that you can use most USB drives. You could also actually have 2 hard drives, and then it will install from one hard drive onto the other, because it's just a raw hard drive image really. But mainly like USB sticks would be the way to use the image, or burn a CD and install that. It's basically the same thing. So I think I've covered most of it. So if there are any other things, then I would advise checking the archive.org page or the README file. Yeah. One final note about this script that I made for these drivers that I found on Phil's Computer Lab. These are for the Sound Blaster live cards and such. This script didn't work when I installed only the option 1 with the memory restriction. And I realized I tested this originally with the himemx and umbpci updates. So I installed here the option 2. This was originally tested with option 3, but I installed option 2 with Patchmem and installed the drivers and then ran the script, and then it worked. So on this machine, option 1 with only the memory restriction gave me issues with DOS-related things, which I haven't had on other machines. However, on this machine, the himemx and Patchmem works well. So this worked fine with Patchmem, just like on himemx. So we have sound. Yeah. So you might have to do a little bit of testing depending on what machine you're using. Trial and error, basically. So all I can say is good luck and chew bubblegum.